bushes, and as you can see, this was quickly consuming my blue energy bar up here. I did manage to increase the graveyard quality up to -25 with my efforts, before wandering off to investigate the world. I found this spot that's blocked until a certain day, a giant wheat field, and the village where I entered the Dead Horse Tavern. No one was particularly chatty in here, except for Mrs. Chain, who sold recipes, and her husband Horadric the Tavern. He told me the unauthorized meat in my bags looks delicious. I'm down cannibal. He also had me deliver a letter to the blacksmith, and just like in every other pixel art game known to man, the blacksmith asked me to kill some sliders. Also, he gave me the blueprint for a furnace. I then revisited the tavern. That was Miss Charm Munro, clearly a very gifted singer, and she told me the same thing every woman tells me. Go away and come back when you're less pathetic. This poet called me over and asked me to get him some paper and ink so that he can write poems to impress Miss Charm. It looks like you've got paper and ink right in front of you already. Fair enough. The tavern keep gave me a beer as thanks for delivering his letter. And then I headed out as day 2 dawned and wandered down here where I found the farm. This guy sells seeds. I didn't buy any just yet, but it was good to know. And he taught me some veggie dish recipes. Then Jerry ambushed me from behind a bush and taught me about foraging. I investigated my farm a bit, placing down a garden bed, but of course I had no seeds, so I resolved to go back to the farm bloke once I had some money. I then investigated the yard blueprint desk, and the basement, in which I heard this weird bald bloke snake raging about being locked out. There were multiple blocked passageways for me to clear once I had the resources, and some bags of flour and old broken barrels to collect. I drew some water from the well in the yard and then had a cheeky snooze. When you sleep in this game, time moves faster and you replenish energy. Makes sense to me. I awoke and worked out I could take the water out of the bucket, which was revolutionary, and I used it with flour to make some dough at my cooking table. I then chucked some dough in the oven to cook into bread, using some sticks I'd collected as fuel. I then foraged some mushrooms and flowers, and I chopped down my first tree. I carted the big old logs back to store in my yard's timber stockpile, and then couldn't figure out what to do with them, which is a common theme, by the way. I must admit I was reasonably confused early on in this game. There are lots of mechanics that you've got to work out by bumbling around like a goose. Good thing for me though, I am a grade A goose. Anyway, I then gave Jerry his bead. He was disappointed that it wasn't very strong, but with that I'd earned 20 points of friendship, and I was able to ask Jerry how to get home to my real world. He said there is a portal on Witch's Hill, and that I should check out the library under the church, or chat to the astrologer to find out more. He also told me to get him some wine. There were quests piling up, but for now it was time to deal with body number 2. I stole its flesh, had a look at these red and white skulls, which were almost certainly important but meant nothing to me at this point, and then headed to the graveyard to bury it, earning my second burial certificate. I grabbed my first 2 pieces of bread which were ready, put more on to cook, and then headed out. Running east to see the astrologer, because I think he's around on whatever this day is, the blue moon, the blue present moon day. I was correct about what day the astrologer visits, but I was reading the calendar incorrectly. See, I thought whatever was currently at the top of the circle represented the current day, when in fact it was the bottom of the circle. In other words, I was confused about what day it was, and the astrologer was not. I did at least find the fisherman, who tasked me with finding him 6 moths. He promised to give me a fishing rod in return. I wandered around foraging as the sun rose on day 4, and I was getting lots of green tech points. So I whipped open the tech menu and unlocked the skill to harvest bones and skin from the dead bodies. A good find. By the way, you get red tech points from crafting, green points from natural activities like foraging and farming, and blue points from spiritual activities. And these blue points are pretty scarce early on. I stumbled upon this weird bloke, Dick, and rudely assumed that he must be crazy. He insisted he's not, and then proceeded to say a bunch of crazy things before asking me to bring him some honey. I continued my wandering and found this gypsy baron that asked for 4 silver-colored fish fillets, this carpenter Tress, Rosa, who sold dairy goods, and the beekeeper. I then sold my 2 burial certificates at the tavern for 3 silver. I decided to use these earnings to buy honey for Dick, because I love Dick. Except by the time I got to him, he had disappeared for the night, which was very rude. And so I made the long walk home. I put some baked mushrooms on the cook. By the way, the bread gives 15 energy, and these mushroom skewers will give 12 each, which was handy, but certainly wasn't enough to keep my energy topped up for long. And so for the early game, snoozing up a storm was the best way to replenish energy. After this particular snooze, the ghost Yorick paid me a visit, complaining about how mean the ghost of the body in the bottom right corner of the graveyard was behaving. He gave me an exhumation license and told me to dig up the body and chuck it in the river. And I've never been one to argue with the ghost, so guess what I did? What have I done? we're done. Like the video and subscribe if you think it's perfectly normal to dig up a body and dump it in the river, all because a ghost told you to. I investigated my tech tree a bit and unlocked beekeeping, soaring, and firewood before collecting a bunch of stone and wood as I cleared out my yard a bit. I built my first workstation, a sawhorse, and this lets me cut those big logs I've been collecting into flitch or billets. I used the last of my energy to break this big old rock and then headed for a snooze. I woke Yorick the ghost, who was thankful that I removed the troublesome corpse from the graveyard. He explained the red and white skulls to me. They represent a corpse's spiritual status. Basically, the corpses affect my graveyard quality, and white skulls are good, red skulls are bad. And the way to get rid of red skulls and increase the white skulls is by removing body parts or embalming. I made a furnace and chopped up some billets to make a chopping station, and then chopped some firewood to fuel my oven, in which I continued baking bread. I collected some more resources through the night, and suddenly it was day 7. I continued acquainting myself with the world when I made a grand discovery. There was a bunch of iron to collect directly north of my house. The days in this game are really quick, by the way, so it was somehow already night by the time I was done collecting most of the iron, and I was ambushed by bats. I killed a couple, but then ran out of energy, so I was forced to flee. I'd collected a whopping 46 iron ore, so I put some on to smelt. I probably should have just slept to renew my energy, but I hate using time sleeping. So I ate some fresh bread and a bunch of berries and mushrooms and kept working. I unlocked transplanting, which lets me plant orchard trees, a few simple grave decorations, and the ability to extract blood and fat from bodies. I collected more stone, fought some slimes, collected more wood, and then welcomed my third juicy corpse. This one had 1 red skull and 2 white, and when I removed the blood, it became 3 white skulls. So I guess this person had bad blood. I buried the corpse, put a bunch more iron onto smelt, and then finally figured out I could cook bread more than one at a time if I simply used this little arrow, a revolutionary find. On day 9, I unlocked woodworking and made myself a carpentry bench, granting me access to plates, which are very handy for crafting tons of various things. I made a couple and then made a wooden cross and grave fence. I took these to the graveyard and placed them both on this grave, and as you can see, the grave's quality went from a 0 to a 3, and with that I finally understood how to improve my graveyard quality. Removing these scraggly trees helped a bit too, and then I figured out I could repair some of these old grave decorations using the repair kits I was given. I'd improved the graveyard quality up to -11 when another body arrived. It was the exact same as the last body, all I had to do was remove the blood. I unlocked stoneworking, mining, and primitive forging, and then finally
than the
had a
RX6700XT.
and on day 10 I wanted to clear this rubble, but I needed simple iron parts. I headed out collecting mushrooms and berries as I went, and I sold my 2 burial certificates to the tavern. I then hit up the blacksmith and bought the 4 simple iron parts I needed. While I was out, Donkey brought another body, and it's such a long run home, it was night by the time I returned to carve it up. I decided to remove everything from this body, and I made a surgeon's mistake, maiming the body and reducing its quality. Whoops. Put the skin back on. So it turns out you can put body parts back in, and that actually returned one of the white skulls to this particular body. Preparing corpses is quite the art form. I slept half of day 11 just to get my energy back, and when I emerged, Jerry was rather distressed that the Inquisitor was visiting Witch's Hill, and I promised to go be a distraction so Jerry didn't get crushed by the Inquisitor's wrath. I wandered over, and the Inquisitor was a whispery fellow who invited me to join him at a witch burning ceremony. Let's repeat my offer. The Inquisitor seemed worried that the dark cult was rising, and he of course wants the church to be all-powerful, so he needs to eliminate any potential threats. I don't know about all that, but who can argue with a fun time burning some witch? The Inquisitor said he didn't trust anyone in the village and asked if I would assist him. I agreed, and he said he'd have some tasks for me on the same day next week. And this is when I finally realized.
Spins. Boots.
I've just realized. I was about to say it isn't
Boots.
this day. It's this day, right? It's the one on the bottom that shows what day it is. For goodness sake. That helps. I explored the Witch's Hill a bit. Looks like this area's had a bit of a dramatic past. And then I tended to this body which had decayed a bit while I was off gallivanting. I guess I just trial and error this and I can always put it back in. Oh, that worked. Happy days.
Boots.
Blues wasn't moon day.